Palestinian citizens of Israel have no national rights. They can have civil rights, but they can't have national rights. And then you have millions of people, of course, under occupation who are being ethnically cleansed and suffering genocide. Now, that model where you can just take a group of people, arbitrarily strip them of their rights. You can take their weapons from them. You can stick them into camps, whether they're refugee camps or concentration camps or whatever. You can remove them from your homes and just stick them into basically temporary housing that becomes permanent as a form of human warehousing. You can kill them. You can force them to go through checkpoints. You can just treat them as subhuman. I think that is the ideal for how the ruling class really envisions the future.
Dan Cohen, thanks for talking to me today, man. I've been reaching out forever. You're all over the world, and finally we made it happen, man.
No, definitely. I appreciate you having me on. I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, man. Well, you and I connected like over a year ago when the latest upheaval in Haiti happened, and initially that was what I reached out about. That's what I wanted to talk about. But so myself personally, I've spent a couple of decades trying to unravel this Israel puzzle. I've read a bunch of books on Israel, a bunch of books on Palestine, views from both sides. And what happens is, as I'm sure you've experienced, once you start traveling down that rabbit hole, it just gets more convoluted. It gets more complicated because there are very obviously big pieces of the story that are missing in published books and, things that are considered mainstream. And it's very obvious when you're reading the story and you're trying to connect the dots. You're like, this doesn't make sense how this ends up here and then this goes there. And, I think Daryl Cooper has done a really good job kind of filling in the gaps with his Martyr Made podcast, because he kind of delves into the intelligence side and the Zionist angle that is commonly left out of the story. And I know yourself, you've been on this for a very long time. You've made numerous documentaries. You're basically anywhere in the world that people are being oppressed or subjugated, you can find Dan Cohen. That's basically the way I've associated you for a long time. So I guess the first question I want to ask you is, what is the current situation on the ground in Gaza right now?
Yeah, firstly, that's a pretty fair assessment. I mean, I came into this as sort of I don't want to say a bleeding heart leftist, but when I got into journalism in 2014, that's when I started. I was really just I was in my later 20s and spent my 20s trying to figure out what to do with my life, and was like, journalism, I don't know. And it took a long time, and finally I just dove in. And but a lot of it was from just sympathizing with people who are oppressed and subjugated, and Israel Palestine I felt was a place that I could do a lot, because as a Jewish American guy, I have a lot of privilege there. I could get away with a lot. So my politics have really evolved in very dramatic ways since then. That was kind of the jumping off point for me. And now, I don't really, I guess there is left and right, or progressive and conservative in certain respects, but I feel like it can be a bit superficial. So I am much less enthused, or I find those terms to be less and less relevant over time. And so, so my time in Gaza, I was able, so just to explain, when I was there, I got into Gaza in 2014 during the Israeli war on Gaza in 2014 in the summer, which was 51 days long. Israel killed about 2,200 Palestinians, 551 children. So it was really like a prequel to the outright genocide that we're seeing now. And of course, that was a very shocking thing for me. I mean, I had only been in, journalism for a few months at that point, and all of a sudden I'm in this little ghetto with bombs dropping, around, and I'm like, do I stay? Do I go? I don't know, So, and that's in the documentary Killing Gaza. Like, I was able to spend over the next 3 years a total of 7 months in Gaza, and that turned into the documentary Killing Gaza, which I made with Max Blumenthal, and that basically summarizes, most of my time there. I mean, what's happening in Gaza now is, you know, it's almost incomprehensible, how horrific it is. I mean, at this moment, you have basically 2 million people, however many people have survived to this point, starving. There has been zero aid, including food, of course, allowed in since I think March 2nd is when Israel completed its total siege of the Gaza Strip. And so whatever supplies were in at that point, that was it. And so now it's come to, you can see it on social media. I mean, this is the most kind of jarring thing about this time to me, is that you can just watch this stuff on social media. You can watch a father say, like, I haven't been able to feed my child for 3 days, my children, and I bought a packet of stevia for $17, and I'm gonna mix it in some water so they can have something. And like, you can just, people reach out to you, and anything you can do for me to help me. It's just the most jarring thing. We're in this incredible information age where everybody can just see this all the time, but we feel so helpless. Like, why can't we do anything? And so, you just watch massacres on a daily basis. You watch videos of the bombs dropping, of people just under the rubble, helpless, and there's like nothing moves. It can be very overwhelming, honestly. Where it's like, I've gone through periods where, for the first month of this genocide after October 7th, I hardly slept more than like a few hours a night. I was, and then I hit a wall at one point, and I slept like 8 hours one night, and then I was at a more sort of, it's like it normalizes. And then after a few months, my wife was gone. I was taking care of my kid and just working all the time. And like, I was getting like very depressed, where I was still working, but I was like, it's like things aren't 3-dimensional anymore. It's like, it's just so close to you for so long. And I'm so far away. I'm used to being an on the ground journalist. So just consuming things through your screen, through your phone, it really like takes a toll on you psychologically. And, that's gone on for what? We're at what, 20 months now? And it's just gotten more and more absurd. It was like it was Biden's genocide. It was Genocide Joe, and then it was Killer Kamala, and then it was Trump comes in and orders a ceasefire, and I'm like, I'm not a Trump guy, but if he's going to do that, then great. That's amazing. And then he just throws it away. There's all this like negotiations between the U.S. and Hamas secretly in order to not only stop the war, but to get aid into Gaza and to rebuild the thing. And then Israel, supposedly interferes to destroy that. And so then the U.S. allows Israel to resume the war. And Trump's always talking about, the people of Gaza need aid. They're in bad shape. But then he just, so it just gets into like more and more absurd, and just this abyss where I don't know how much worse it can get. I mean, now everyone is basically starving to death. So it's I just don't have words to convey the horror that you and I are witnessing on our smartphones on a daily basis.
And that's the hard part. The hard part is that you're watching it through a screen, right? You're somebody who's actually been there on the ground, talk to the people. So it has a different impact for you, because I'm sure in your mind, when you're watching these things happen, you're thinking of, the shopkeeper that, you talked to when you went to go and get a bottle of water, or, the nurse that walked you through the hospital to show you the devastation. Like, you're thinking about people that you actually know and established a connection with.
Definitely. I mean, sometimes it's just crazy for me to think that I was there. granted, that was several years ago now, but like I know what those street corners look like. I know exactly where that is. I know what that cafe that was bombed on the beach, that's where we used to hang out all the time, my friends and I. And I know like the kind of demographic or segment of the population who goes there. I know who the people, the kids are who would go there to basically sell little pieces of chocolate, who couldn't go to school and would sell chocolate so they could survive. I you know it's I think of like there are just so many places I think of that are just like erased now. And I knew just of course I knew as many people as I knew, but not that many. There's 2+ million people living there. It's just, I mean, these beautiful villages that even though Gaza was walled off behind like series of fences and walls and remote control machine guns and this crazy system, it was very much a thriving society. There was a huge amount of poverty. I mean, for like US or North American or European standards, you would think, yeah, this place is very poor. But there is still a very, a society that really thrived even in those conditions. And there were different classes as well. But to think that like that's all just been obliterated and the people who are trapped in there are being starved to death and killed by the 100 or 150 per day by shooting and by bombing by the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation is just like mind-boggling. Absolutely.
So why are the Israelis blockading Gaza and not allowing in any food? I mean, I think we know the answer, but are there multiple motives, or is it simply just to kill everybody?
It's to, kill everybody. It's basically to compel them to leave or to kill them, whichever works. I mean, we just had the head of the Mossad here in Washington, right, meeting with the Trump administration to try to figure out third-party countries to take in Palestinians. Because Israel knows it's easier than to just kill people by the 100 every day. That's going to take quite a while to kill them. It's like just put them on planes and buses and arrange. We'll pay these people to leave. We got money to do that, and that's been that way actually since the founding of the state, even in Gaza itself. But I mean, the goal, what it is it's about the land. So when I see a little child who's starving or doesn't have limbs, got blown off by some Israeli explosion, it's that little piece of land that 5-year-old occupies is land that Israel wants. And the thing that I think very few people who even follow this issue very closely or even devote themselves to it, including myself, until after October 7th, I really didn't understand the ideology of Zionism. Like, the ideology of Zionism explains why this genocide is happening, because not just, Zionists want to kill, Zionists are racist, Zionists are evil, whatever. It's actually that the goal of Zionism is to take Jews, and what I mean by a Jew is someone who believes in the Jewish religion, and transform them into the exact opposite, a fighting nationalist. Like, since the destruction of the temple, when Jews believe that God punished them by destroying the temple, it's a completely passive religion. Like, Jews are just supposed to live in diaspora, like live in different societies and do and follow the Torah and lived very insular lives separate from society. And if enough Jews are good and follow the commandments, the obligations of the Torah, then eventually God will reward them, not with giving them a state and that's recognized by the UN and a bunch of tanks and airplanes, but by literally sending the Messiah down and a temple falling from the sky, and everyone, not just the Jews, but everyone in the world, all humans, recognize that this is the truth, that there is this one God, Okay, that's the idea of Judaism. It's a completely transformative event, transforms reality. Zionists, the whole thing was, well, religion is all old nonsense. It's ancient nonsense. We're in the time of the Enlightenment, of science, of human advancement, and we want to get rid of this religion. And at the same time, there was nationalism was coming in vogue in the 19th century. You know, you had all the revolutions in Europe, the French Revolution, even the American Revolution, and these inspired a small group of secular Jews, basically people who had abandoned Judaism and wanted nothing to do with the religion, and said, wait a minute, maybe this is the answer to us being persecuted, is that we don't just assimilate into, you know, German or Russian or French society, we actually become a nation, a national movement. So the Jews are no longer a religion that believes in God and passivity and all of this stuff. It's that we fight for land. And the thing is, no, that's a complete invention, because that was never a real thing in Judaism. So they had to make it up. And you're not going to get anyone to believe in the idea of a Jewish nation unless, or any nation, unless you have basically a national mythology or something to draw on. So they took the Torah, the Bible, you know, what Christians call the Old Testament, and said, look, all this land in here, that's our land that we're going to go take. And we are, you know, we're going to create a language. And so the Hebrew language, which has always been used in religious contexts, would not be used really for everyday conversation. There was no vernacular. They were like, we have to turn that into an everyday language. That will be our national language. We need a flag. What became the Israeli flag was originally what's called a tallis. It's like a prayer shawl that if you've ever seen like Jews praying in like a synagogue or at the Western Wall. It's something that you put over yourself. It's very personal. And Zionists, and it has like some lines on it. Zionists were like, that is our flag. So the personal became the public, the national. And so that's the idea of Zionism. And if you look at the early writings of Vladimir Jabotinsky, is I think the best example, who is the founder of revisionist Zionism, which is this is the strain of Zionism that Netanyahu kind of draws from, and the Likud party largely draws from. He was very explicit. The goal of Zionism was to make Jews into their exact opposite. We're not going to be Jews anymore. We're actually going to be Hebrews. They called themselves Hebrews. We're the Hebrew nation. And so the whole idea was the Zionists adopted the common tropes about Jews, that Jews are weak and cowardly and disgusting and weird, and you know, look at them, they wear these coats, they have these big beards, and they're not modern men. And we're gonna adopt those tropes and become their exact opposite. So instead of being cowards and weaklings, we're gonna fight, and we're going, you know. And so that's from the beginning of the Zionist idea until today. That's what explains what is happening, why settlements have expanded, why the Zionists ethnically cleansed large swaths of Palestine in 1947, why there was what happened in the 1920s. This is like the whole history of Zionism, and what we're seeing today is it's just reaching this ultra level, and so, you know, that's the thing, that the key concept, I think, to understanding Zionism is not only that it's genocidal, not only that it's racist, but it's actually a fake ideology. And the more that people associate Judaism with Zionism, what they do is end up legitimizing Zionism, because then you're giving it this 3,000 or several thousand-year-old religion. You're giving it culture and history and persecution and all of these things, when in fact the religious Jews, when they encountered Zionism, they considered it idol worship. They totally rejected it. They were the first enemies of the Zionists were the Jews, and that's the key thing. And it's so, and as the thing is, I was raised as a mostly secular Jew, So I didn't really understand the theology of Judaism and like what is the relationship between Judaism and Zionism. And if you don't know what Judaism is, how can you know what Zionism is? You can say it's outrageous on a moral level, which is kind of the point I was at when I was started in this and for years, but like there are deeper levels to it. And I think it's very, very hard to find that because, especially on social media, there's constant reinforcement of that deception that Zionism is Judaism. And if you actually separate those, then that's how you really attack it. But it's a lot of people don't want to do that because they're like, look, there's a genocide going on right now. What do you like? Let's stop the genocide and we'll figure out this Judaism, Zionism stuff. But it's like you got to go to the root, in my opinion.
Man, you just hit on something that I've been working on in my own writing. So with Israel, it seems to me, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but there are really two interests converging on that part of the world in the early days. You have the Eastern European Jews who are tired of being chased around the world. You have a series of pogroms that occur in Eastern Europe that drives the Eastern European Jews back to Israel, literally for safety, because they are not safe where they are. They are at threat of being massacred at any point in time whenever people decide that they have to die. And then you have this elitist Zionist interest that converges at the same time. And what you just mentioned, like the synonymizing of the Jewish people with Zionism, is kind of the goal, right? Zionism is tucked away underneath Judaism. Judaism is kind of like a mask for it. And you have this Zionist elitist interest that, in my opinion, would sacrifice every fucking Jew on earth to achieve whatever ends it's after. Right? Like it's like kind of what you said. It's anti-Jewish in a sense, right? And it does not care about the Jewish people. It has an agenda, and the Jewish people are really only intended to serve that agenda. And so now we're in this place where you can't talk about Zionism without accusations of anti-Semitism being hurled at you instantly. Like, I know once this podcast episode comes out, that's going to be the main thing. My email inbox is going to flood with people calling me a Nazi, which is fine. I've been called that many times before, but it's this melding of Zionism with the Jewish people. And we're, for whatever reason, the moment we start to try to pick it apart, the forces at work that are holding it together are just, they're pushing as hard as they can so that you can't separate the two.
Right. Yes, definitely. And I think you especially see that on social media, to be honest. I think like there are two sides to, I guess one of the things I've realized over the past few years is like, okay, the Iraqi WMD lie was like relatively straightforward. There were no WMDs. We went to war on a totally false pretext. A much more effective deception has at least two sides. So, and you can, and there can be very vigorous debate within those two sides, within the bumpers. But as long as the debate doesn't veer off of that path, then great. So, basically, if you believe that you'll have like one side that believes Judaism is Zionism, and therefore, Jews have been persecuted, and so we have to do all this terrible stuff. We have to, kill all these Palestinians, and they're terrorists, and et cetera, et cetera. And that's like the, standard Zionist response. You'll have some who think Judaism is Zionism, and that's why Jews, like left-wing secular Jews, have to go stop, Israel, and we have a special responsibility to stop Israel. But that is still accepting the basic premise of Zionism, that it is Judaism, that like me as an American citizen, American national, I live I was born here, I'm completely American by culture, but I am somehow tied to the state on the other side of the world that simply claims to be doing what it does, to exist on my behalf. A lot of people accept that premise. And until like for a long time, I avoided being tokenized. I don't want to be tokenized, you know, but I had a viral tweet on October 7th, you know, that was very emotionally driven. And it was like, I'm an American Jew, and, you know, I had my bar mitzvah in Israel. I went there on like a family trip when I was 13. And I support Palestinian resistance. And it took me months to understand really that that's actually a very left-wing Zionist position, because it's not me being Jewish that gives me any special insight. The fact that I was born to a Jewish family that gives me any special insight to what Israel is doing. Anybody could go there and be a journalist. You could, you know, anybody could do that and go see what's going on. It's just that, but like that tweet went super viral. And so now I'm like, oh, I hate when I see it like come up, you know, from time to time. But it shows how indoctrinated not only I was, but like these like, you know, I don't know, 70 or 80,000 people who retweeted me that are like, yeah. And so like if we actually, the only way that, you know, I mean, I'm speaking along as an American, but the only way that Americans can stop what's going on there is if we organize along national lines. If we're just like, okay, a bunch of like left-wing Jews who are like, you know, whatever, mostly like middle class or upper middle class college graduates are going to go occupy the Congress. You're going to get like 300 or 400 of them. That's something that the police can easily deal with. And it creates a scene, and, you know, Jewish Voice for Peace, that's the group that tends to do that. You know, groups like that, they really believe in what they're doing, but it reinforces this whole idea of that it's just Jews who are supposed to do this. What we need is a mass movement. You need, like, you know, imagine if 10,000 people did that instead of 300, and Jews were only like 2% of the population. So what ends up happening is we end up gatekeeping this issue. And so people who aren't Jewish, who are totally revolted by what's happening, they're like, well, you know, I'm not Jewish, or I don't want to be called an anti-Semite, or this isn't really my issue because I'm not Jewish. So there's that angle to it. And then you have like like people who believe Jews are Zionists and therefore Jews are terrible people because look what they're doing, you know? And there's a big explosion of that on social media, or at least it's certainly pumped into my
Mine too.
feed, right? Yeah, and so they are all in this same you know, within the boundaries that are set to maintain this narrative and this fiction that Zionism really is Judaism, when it's actually designed to be the furthest thing, the exact opposite of Judaism, in order to get Jews to stop being Jewish. And I suspect that there is a significant amount of that is artificial, in the sense that, do you remember when Elon Musk took over X, and at some point, I think maybe it was before October 7th, he said the ADL, the Anti-Defamation League, is coming on board. So if the Anti-Defamation League, which ostensibly, though not in reality, exists to combat anti-Semitism, anti-Jewish sentiment, is involved with Twitter, yet we constantly see like insane memes about Jews, this, that, going viral. And we know that Zionism thrives off of anti-Semitism because they need it to justify what they're doing. Oh, well, that's very convenient. So I suspect that, you know, I don't know how much of it is inflated, how much of the anonymous accounts that promote that stuff are actually like, who knows, are they Israeli? Are they, you know, just whatever Zionist, you know, to maintain this whole illusion. And so I think that's, you know, I'm not going to say that if the ADL wasn't involved, or, you know, if the JVP, like leftists or right-wing people who, you know, have conflated Zionism with Judaism or whatever, had figured this out, then the genocide wouldn't be happening. But I think those are major roadblocks, and it's taken me again. It took me almost it took me a decade almost to figure that out.
It's wild. I'm in the same place. You know, I've read numerous books on this, and every time I jump into it, I'm like, this just doesn't make any fucking sense. There are components missing from this, you know, and like I've been apprehensive about commenting on this for a long time because number one, I'm a Christian, and Israel today resembles to me a lot of the Israel we see in the New Testament and the Israel that Jesus is rebelling against. There are a lot of parallels there. They seem to be mirror images of each other. And if Jesus were to walk through Gaza today, I really don't think he'd be cool with what's going on there. You know, I don't think he'd be happy to see, you know, children with their heads blown off and people starving to death in the streets because food can't get in. But yet you have this Christian contingent that just blindly supports Israel because they're supposed to. They don't even know why. Like, I'm sure you saw that interview Ted Cruz did with Tucker Carlson, and it was so revealing because he's such a fucking idiot. You know, he references that one passage from Genesis, which, again, by the way, that passage is referring to a people, not a state, not blindly follow Netanyahu into the depths of hell, right? But it's people who interpret the Bible literally because it benefits whatever cause they serve. Now, speaking of that, speaking of Ted Cruz and you know, social media and what you mentioned and AIPAC and all, why does Israel have such a disproportionate amount of influence over Western culture and politics? Do you have any idea why?
Yeah, that's kind of the million or multi-billion or what, $3.7 billion per year question, whatever, right. the memorandum of, you know, the US aid to Israel, plus all the other money that goes. You know, I think that, okay, what I think about that has kind of also evolved, and it's still a question I'm kind of formulating my answer to, but I would say this. First off, I'll say I think the Jeffrey Epstein answer is in the most generous way, I would say very insufficient, falls very, very short. Even if there is some kind of blackmail pedophile ring of some like crazy Jew who was like raping young women and girls on his island and got powerful figures involved and filmed it to blackmail for the Mossad, I think that is still a very insufficient explanation because there are many politicians who have nothing to do with Jeffrey. You know, AOC just voted in favor of Iron Dome, and there's no record of AOC on Jeffrey Epstein's island or on the Lolita Express or any, you know, AOC is not that type. I also, and I mean, I know that this is going to be controversial, but I strongly think that the Epstein story is something of, I want to be careful how I say this, but sort of a psychological operation, in the sense that I feel like it's being like, okay, we know that Epstein was like trafficked young like women and girls. Some of his accusers, you know, if you've seen, like, especially what Michael Tracy has been saying, he's been pointing out that like a lot of these key accusers are not who they say they are, or they have like big, you know, mental problems. Or so I think there's just so much less that we know about the Epstein case that then has been kind of appears to have been confirmed. And I think it's sort of a cover for something much, much deeper and multi-generational even, and more insidious, a much darker truth than, like, you know, if we could just get rid of this one pedophile ring, but the DOJ or, you know, Bill Barr disappeared the footage of this guy. To me, it feels like a little bit too on the nose, you know, that it's like, if we could just get rid of that one thing, then we'd have like a normal country and Israel wouldn't be controlling us, you know, like, Like, I think it's something much, much deeper than that. And I don't know what exactly the truth of the Epstein thing is. I'm not saying, he wasn't an obvious sleazebag, um, and there are major questions about it. It could be, that part of it, like say, the UK stuff is true and the US stuff is overblown. So I'm not trying to deny. I'm just like very careful with it. I think there is of course we can look at AIPAC, which is obviously important, and the Israel lobby, and the fact that Israel's not the Israel lobby has incredible influence, is not registered, as foreign agent. There's no registration as foreign agents like every other country. I think a couple things. Okay, one is that there is our ruling class sees Israel as its model. Like, you have a fake nationality, basically a fake group of people, a bunch of people who are told you are a nationality, the Jewish nationality, when there's no such thing as a Jewish nationality. So you can create that, you can mold that however you want, lording over a population that is basically stripped of all of their national rights, at least their national rights. Like, Palestinian citizens of Israel have no national rights. They can have civil rights, but they can't have national rights. And then you have millions of people, of course, under occupation, who are being ethnically cleansed and suffering genocide. Now, that model where you can just take a group of people, arbitrarily strip them of their rights. You can take their weapons from them. You can stick them into camps, whether they're refugee camps or concentration camps or whatever. You can remove them from your homes and just stick them into basically temporary housing that becomes permanent as a form of human warehousing. You can kill them. You can force them to go through checkpoints. You can just treat them as subhuman. I think that is the ideal for how the ruling class really envisions the future. And so I think that's part of it. I don't think even that is really quite a sufficient answer. The other thing, this I need to flesh this answer out more. But I think there's Israel also serves. If you look at what Israel was in the COVID era, a Pfizer executive said that Israel is like a laboratory for us.
Yes.
And they were the first to get the Pfizer vaccines. They had special arrangements. They had the strictest lockdown. And so I was like, okay, so the Israelis are a laboratory, are lab rats for pharma, and the Palestinians are lab rats for the weapons industry. And they just tell the Israelis that they're special. And I think there's something about that model that is very useful, and again, it's like that's the model that they want to replicate in the U.S. And so the more that there's protests here that are generally very ineffective because, as I said before, they tend to be, it's like college kids. So it's just limited to college kids, and then they go out on summer break, and then it dies. Instead of okay, how do you actually organize masses of people to really force change? It becomes kind of like these siloed protests, whether it's liberal Jews going to the Capitol, or American Muslims for Palestine who are going to say free Palestine, or this or that, instead of how do we actually get the average American to engage in this? How do you get labor unions? How do you get people to shut down ports? These kinds of things where you actually force the gears of the country to stop, if that's really the will of the people. And I forgot exactly what I was connecting that thought to, but I think that's a key thing, is the understanding that Israel is very much the image, and they can, by calling everyone who's critical of Israel an anti-Semite, there's the way that the Holocaust has been positioned in history, that like Jews are the ultimate victim, and there were no other victims of the Holocaust, and it's the worst genocide ever, and it's the ultimate genocide. Then it can be used to deflect all criticism. Like, it's the perfect way to deflect all criticism, including for genocide itself. So that's my general answer, but I want to develop that more.
Yeah, no, you hit on something that I've put a lot of thought into. So my mother is Plains Cree Indian. I'm technically in Canada what they would refer to as Métis, kind of like mixed blood. And there's this, what I've long said about the way Indigenous people in Canada and the United States are treated by the state, is that they're perpetually indentured servants because they are trained to believe that they are victims, and that they serve victimhood and nothing else. And in serving victimhood, they have to be taken care of by the state. So they're often isolated and sequestered to reservations. If you're Indigenous person who lives on a reservation, it is very, very hard to get off the reservation, because you're used to a multitude of government programs that basically assist you in your livelihood. And so it's very hard to disconnect from that. And also just the victim mentality. And I see a lot of that happening in Israel, where Jews are told, like, hey, if you go out into the world, like, they fucking hate you. Like, you're at risk. You have to stay here. You have to stay in this place. And it's not just Israel. It's really wherever there's large Jewish communities. You always kind of see that same thing resonate, where it's this victim mentality of, you are a target. So be prepared for that. And, and they're kind of trained to view themselves that way, which, look, it's not completely untrue. Like, if you know anything about history, you know that Jews have been routinely persecuted for hundreds and thousands of years. But it's very hard to break out of that mentality once you've been indoctrinated into it, even if the threat doesn't really exist. And I feel like that's the approach that we take here in Canada, like for example, with the Holocaust. Look, man, that it's one of the worst human tragedies in the history in known history, right? If you dig into it and you read about what Hitler and Mengele and Himmler did to just innocent people, I mean, it's hard to read without weeping. But on the same hand, right, like, are we not able to be critical of Israel without being accused of denying that this thing happened? Like, again, it's like it's synonymized, right? Like, either you are in full support of Israel and you agree that the Holocaust was a terrible thing, or if you criticize Israel, you're a Holocaust denier, you're the worst person in the world, you're basically Hitler, and you want to murder Jews. And it's like, I want none of that. I just don't want this state, which is very obviously a satellite military installation for the United States in the Middle East, which, of course, lends to one of the reasons why they have so much power, because they are a very strategic location for the United States in the Middle East. I just don't want them to, like, kill innocent people. And, going back to what we were talking about, like the pro-Palestine protests, you said something beautiful in the last bit there, where you talked about how these protests are siloed, right? If we just humanized them and said, hey, man, these are people. These are human beings. Like, these are people with dreams and hopes and futures that are being cut short, I think we could all get on board with that. It's once we put each other in these boxes, in these categories, right? Oh, they're Palestinians, Hamas. Every Palestinian hates Jews. Now, as a Jewish person, how was your experience on the ground in Gaza? How were you received? Were you met with stones and rockets, or were you okay?
No, I mean, pretty much almost every Palestinian uses, they say Yahud, which is Jew, interchangeably for, they say Yahud when they're referring to their oppressor, but they know that I'm not their oppressor. I mean, I didn't advertise that I was Jewish, but my name is Dan Cohen, which is like a super Jewish name, of course,
Yeah.
and it is like very Israeli also. It's like John Smith is American, so um, I never had an issue whatsoever. I In fact, I was so kind of curious about it, how people might receive me, that in two instances when I was in Gaza, I was with a friend of mine going out in the fields and filming. Like one time we were in this neighborhood Shujaiya, which is east of Gaza City. Today is a site of many massacres and starvation. It's where Rifat Al-Arir was, the famous poet and English literature professor who was killed thanks to Barry Weiss in December 2023, where he was from. So we were in this neighborhood, and this is not long, maybe, I don't know, several months after the 2014 war, and we were playing, like I was filming these kids, 10, 12, 13 years old, playing soccer in a bombed out school. And they invited us back to their house, and it's getting dark, and we walk, back through the rubble, and it's very, very dramatic scenes. And the kids are actually in the documentary. Actually, there's a part where, they're just walking and kicking their ball, and you see them kicking the ball in the school, and it's those kids. And so we went to their house, and their house is like a 2-story house. Half of it is blown out, like everywhere. No walls. There are pictures of their older brothers who were fighters with Hamas who were killed, and we went to the house and we're talking with the family, and very welcoming, nice family, and we're kind of connecting with them. And after a while, I asked my friend, I was like, what would you think if I told him I'm Jewish? And he was like, go ahead, we can. And so he told him, and the guy was like, oh, I mean, he's an older guy, and he was like, oh, I have Jewish friends, and when I used to work in Israel, and he's from an older generation before the siege on Gaza, which was like 2006 or 2005 that it started, where Palestinians in Gaza used to go work inside Israel as day laborers. And, it was a decent wage for them. They could build, buy a home and that kind of thing. And granted, that's not like a friendship, but it's certainly, people a lot of people long, especially older generation, longed for those better days when there were better relations, even though there was an occupation, even though, they didn't have their rights and they could only be laborers for, in Israeli construction or whatever it is. He didn't care. He also, conflated in a way Jew and Israeli, but for him, he didn't care. There was one other instance where there were a couple of boys, like 14, 15-year-old boys, who we were talking to in the same neighborhood, and we told them, and I actually filmed it, and they said, oh, really? And they were kind of shocked, and we explained to them the difference between a Jew and an Israeli, and they're like, oh, okay, they don't have any problem with Jews. So the idea, that we're sold that Palestinians are the reincarnation of Nazis and they just want to kill Jews, and that's why October 7th happened, and it's all just total nonsense, of course, which is, obvious to you or me, but you're right that it's like a lot of Jewish communities, especially, well, not only secular ones, but especially secular ones who don't. The thing is, when, like, the community that I was raised in, Reform Judaism is what it's called. It's, here's one thing I'll say about Judaism. Everyone understands, like with Christianity, there are many different denominations. There are tons of, there's Catholic, there's Protestant, there's Baptist, there's so many different ones. Everyone just thinks like Jews are all the same. There are tons of different kinds of Jews who, frankly, like the religion that the form of Judaism that I was raised in is totally different than Orthodox Judaism. And Orthodox Judaism has a lot of variation, within it. So it's like, people tend to lump Jews in as just this one thing, and there's so many kind of varieties of Jews who there is no like Jewish community. There is no, just as like there's no Christian community. It's not like Christians like all have meetings. I mean, okay, Catholics have the Pope, but we don't even have a Pope. We don't have anything like that.
Right.
Like Jews don't have like a holy man who, or it's rabbis or just teachers. It's just, the most learned people.
Yeah.
So all that to say, so like a lot of secular Jews, because they don't really know anything about the religion, but they want to maintain that Jewish identity, they end up getting attached to Israel and being like, oh, well, we need it for safety and this kind of thing. And so they're very sensitive to like, oh, the ADL has a new report, or Jake Tapper says that, there's an anti-Semitic incident in New York City or this or that or whatever. And it's just constant gaslighting. And it's a very kind of, can be kind of an elite sort of thing that it's, of course you're going to, fall for that stuff because it confirms your beliefs about why you are where you are in the world and that kind of thing. I mean, the thing, one of the other reasons I think I didn't say, but I meant to, when you asked me why Israel has so much influence, I think also part of it has to do with that propaganda of the definition of what a Jew is. Yeah. That, like people think like Mark Levin or like Jake Tapper or Dana Bash or all these people are Jews. And it's like, well, do these people practice the religion in any sense of the, in any way? Okay, maybe they go to like the synagogue like once or twice a year, or maybe Mark Levin goes more than I don't actually know, but like most of the like most prominent Jews in like media, they're totally secular. They don't do anything that's remotely Jewish. They just are like, my Jewish identity, Israel, leave Israel alone, support Israel. But in those, it's like when you compare them to say an Orthodox Jew in Williamsburg, Brooklyn, who's completely against the state of Israel, not because they necessarily, are like, not from like a human rights perspective, that may be the case too, but because Zionism is against their religion. Yeah. So it's like, wait, so you're going to lump that person in with that, and then when people want to make it just like a Jewish thing, it's like, well, how about like, I don't know, the atheist Raytheon executive? Did they have any culpability for this, for like making bank off of mass murder? So I think there's people, if people understand the actual definition of a Jew, then the reality is that most Jews are actually just as confused about what Judaism is and what Jews are as most non-Jews are in the United States.
Yeah. It's funny because like, I think you and I share the same Twitter feed, because I get the the trees, this Jew controls this, and then these Jews control these, and they're all Jews, and I'm like, no, Zionist, right. Zionist. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And like, and that's the thing, is it's like, people who are active members of the World Zionist Organization, there's something else completely, right? Like they just so happen to share the same ancestry and the same bloodline. But you made a really good point, like with Orthodox Jews, right? Like they're against anything that threatens their value structure and belief system and way of life. And Zionism just so happens to threaten that. And so like there's the problem is, man, is that we live in this world where everything has been reduced down to 3 sentences in a tweet, and the nuance has been completely stripped out. And that, again, I mean, it's the reason why nobody has like a clear understanding of this Israel-Palestine conflict, which is the most complicated territorial dispute ever in history, with no real solution, because it just doesn't seem like you're ever going to be able to solve the problem. And right now, Israel appears to be trying to solve that problem by just wiping everyone out. And that's not a solution, man. That's just mass murder. And that's the side that I've fallen on after all of my reading and all of my discussions. And, like I try to look at both sides of the argument, and I've extended an invitation to people on the pro-Israel side, but nobody will talk to me. And when that happens, when nobody will talk to you, it means because they are afraid of their bullshit being exposed. And it's still, the invitation's open. Anybody watching this, if you want to come on and have the discussion from the opposite side of this and refute anything Dan has said here, I am more than open to it. This is not an ideological podcast. I talk to people from all sorts of viewpoints and all places of the world, but nobody will have that discussion. It's like when you're talking to people who are on the radical left or trying to get somebody from the radical left to have a discussion. They won't do it because it's easy to poke holes in virtually anything they say. And that's where we are here. And so it's like, now it's, going back to the Epstein thing, I feel like this whole Epstein controversy isn't about a list. I think that the people at the very, very top who run these honeypot operations, these intelligence operations, they don't give a fuck about any of the names on that list. There is nobody on those lists that are big and powerful and important enough to conceal their names. I think what they're trying to hide is the fact that these operations go on all over the world all the time. And if this one gets laid out for all of us to see, we're going to be able to find others. And it compromises some very serious intelligence operations that have been going on for decades all over the place.
It might. Of course, honeypot is like a real, a real intelligence tool, sending, like, getting politicians or celebrities or who it is in compromising positions and using that as blackmail is a real thing. I don't know how, without like seeing evidence, I don't know how prevalent or common or it is. And I feel like the Epstein thing is on the front page of the New York Times, I think yesterday or I don't know if it was today or yesterday. I'm like, the New York Times won't even say the word Israel's committing, won't say that Israel's committing a genocide, but they're like pushing the Epstein thing. I'm like, I don't know. The New York Times has done all kinds of crazy propaganda to cover for this. I just feel like it's just a little bit, like I said, too on the nose. Like we're being baited in a way with it. And there's something much deeper that, and also like when you think about what is more like perfect for like low grade Twitter slop than like some like crazy Jew running a pedophile blackmail ring. You know what I mean? It's like it's so easy that like I feel like we're kind of being like led around by the nose with it. Again, I'm not denying the true stuff that's out there, but I feel like it's being overblown in order to distract from other things that are happening. And like, the more, the way that Trump and Vance and Kash Patel and like the Trump administration blew this up to be this huge thing and we're going to take them down and, oh, actually they're in on it. And, it's like, it's I think they just, the same way, like Democrats used Russiagate. Oh, we're this big conspiracy and their base ate it up. It's kind of, except there's more truth with the Epstein thing in the sense that, yes, Epstein actually did commit crimes. But like those kernels of truth are being extrapolated into something much greater, that it's like, this is the conspiracy that really, if we understand this, is like a proxy for understanding why our system works the way it is, why we don't have accountability for this, that, and the next thing. And so, I don't know. Again, hey, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe you're totally right that it's like that this will end up this one will be uncovered and that will uncover others. I don't know. I'm just saying that's my sense. And to be, I don't know if we want to get into this, but like a big reason I think that is because I have some mostly unreleased work on COVID, and it took my belief on COVID now, and I feel extremely confident saying this, is that there was no pandemic at all. There never was a virus like going around and getting people sick. And there was, so the same way that I was talking about earlier, a like different sides to a psyop. There's the natural origin side, and then there's the lab leak side. And those both are on the assumption that there was a pandemic. It's just, did it come from nature or a lab, or was it a bioweapon or an accident or whatever? That's one of the main COVID psyops, and it assumes that it's even possible for a virus to travel around the world and not mutate. And so so one of the things I did, that I was doing until October 7th, when I got pushed into that, is I was documenting how the COVID origin debate unfolded since January 2020 even. And it became so clear to me, like painfully clear, like I was beating myself with like over the head clear, that the whole thing was totally crafted by intelligence agencies and cutouts, and the whole narrative. And it actually, when I got to a point where I was like, I'm about 99.5% sure, based on examining the propaganda, that there was no pandemic. But like, I can't evaluate from a scientific perspective. I'm starting to suspect that like maybe it's not even possible. Maybe it's not just that there was no pandemic that this time, but the whole thing is just science fiction. And I got in touch with this guy named J.J. Cohen, who is one of the most really remarkable thinkers that I know. He was an academic biologist who got fired from the University of Pittsburgh, where he was teaching. He's in Pittsburgh now, and he has a channel called Gigaome Biological. And he's not very active on social media, and like he's mostly like just kind of mostly comments on he doesn't do a lot on like X. He's very active on his channel, does long streams, and like I reached out to him. I was recommended to talk to him, and he explained from a biology perspective, a scientific perspective, why I was right, that yes, my suspicion was correct. And he was actually RFK Jr.'s top advisor. Top advisor, I don't know. He's listed in RFK Jr.'s book, The Wuhan Cover-Up, as he's the first name under the acknowledgement without whom this book would not have been possible. So, and when he basically came to RFK in the middle of research and was like, he realized that a pandemic is not a real thing. RFK basically fired him, politely showed him the door. And so I firmly believe, and I'm looking forward to the day when I can get this piece out, but there was no pandemic. And so that model that I saw of how the pandemic narrative unfolded, and there's kind of different sides to it, and it was a cover for something much more insidious. All of the measures, everything that was implemented under the guise of a pandemic, I recognize that same or a very similar pattern with the Epstein story. That I feel like we're being, like, it's too on the nose and we're just being like led around with it.
Damn it, Dan. I wish you didn't open that up with only like 5 minutes to go, because that's something I would love to explore with you. Yeah.
We can rap for a little bit. It's all good. We can talk.
Okay. So I I know you're working on this story, so I don't want to delve into it too deep, because I'm sure there's key elements of it that you're still working on.
It's all right. No, we can talk freely.
So, okay. So what was the first thread that made you question whether or not, there was a pandemic to begin with?
So for me, I mean, it's funny because I did like a conversation with JJ Cooey about this, and he and I came at it from totally different angles of why both of us started to suspect that maybe there's no pandemic. But for me personally, it was like I was totally on board the COVID narrative, the pandemic narrative early on, in part because I was paying a lot of attention to China at that point because the U.S. was running all these crazy destabilization plots. There were these crazy like protest riots, kind of similar to the Black Lives Matter protests in the U.S., but were happening in Hong Kong, where like you'd have like masses of people going out to protest for something that there is some legitimacy for, of course, but then you'd have like a violent core that would like use that as a pretext to like destabilize, to attack people, to do all kinds of crazy stuff. And so I was doing journalism on those protests. I was following like there were three different stories around that period that I was following that was like it was obvious the US's poorly hidden hand was involved. And so I was like very closely following what's happening in China, where like most people, in North America are not closely following. And so I started to see like, oh, there's some like virus going around. Everyone's wearing a mask. Oh man, this is like serious.
Yeah.
And I see, there's like whatever there's lockdowns, et cetera, et cetera. And I'm here in Washington and like, they're saying, oh, the virus is, around already. And I'm like, oh man, this is crazy. This is dangerous. There's some like killer virus going around and I don't know. And we had a kid in February 2020. And so I was like at home a lot anyway, but I would be like going out to the grocery store and I'm like, nobody's wearing a mask. Like everyone in China is wearing a mask. We're not wearing masks. Like our government doesn't care. We should be like, we need to even lock down for like a couple weeks to let this thing burn out, and I was totally like on board. I mean, it's almost embarrassing at this point, but it's just, this is just how it goes.
It's just the way we all reacted. We all had our own individual reactions.
Totally. To the news, and propaganda is very powerful. And so I was like, okay, well, here we are. And when they started to talk about like coercing people, I started to be like, wait a minute, this is like getting too far. Like, and then, we're going to have a vaccine and you're going to have to get it. And it was like, wait a minute, you can't force people. Like, I know the vaccine isn't going to like stop transmission. So like, if it's just for your own health, you can't force someone to get that. That's crazy. And so I started to, that was like but when I started to really suspect there was no pandemic is the first thing was, I did, I can't even remember where I saw it, but I started to see that the death certification protocol was changed specifically for COVID in the United States. Not only in the United States, probably in Canada too, I don't know, but in the UK also. But I was looking at the US, and I got in touch with this lady. Her name was Joy Fritz, and she worked in a mortuary in the Los Angeles area for several years. And so she knew how to deal with death certificates like the back of her hand. And she explained it to me, and I spent like a month learning about death certificates. And I came to understand that the death certificates, the U.S. government, let's see which agency, it's all murky in my head, but the U.S. government issued a completely different protocol to write death certificates for COVID-19. And I'm like, well, you can't like have a different measurement. That doesn't make sense at all. If you want to change the whole thing, but you can't, so like instead of like how a death certificate normally works is it's a sequence of events. So like you have the immediate cause of death, which is like, say, I don't know, you have some bacterial infection or something, that's what finally kills you. And then you work backwards. And they got that infection because of, this health problem and this problem. And then it leads back to like heart disease or diabetes or cancer or pulmonary, like there are all kinds of issues. The big killers that like you see listed as the big killers. The new death certification protocol is all now firstly, COVID-19 should be the underlying cause of death, meaning the last one in the sequence, the real cause of death, more often than not. And anytime COVID-19 is written anywhere on that death certificate, that means the underlying cause of death is COVID-19. I was like, that's complete nonsense. So like, if you like get run over by a bus and you had COVID-19, then they're going to say you died of COVID. That is what they're saying, And so with this woman, Joy Fritz, we started looking at the data that the CDC was providing. They have a system called Wonder that shows all of the mortality data for each year. And it takes, at first it's like preliminary data, and then it takes like a year before it's finalized. But we started to take it and calculate like by the normal, the standard method of calculating of death certification protocol. What we found is like about almost 90% of those COVID deaths were not COVID deaths at all, would not have been classified as COVID deaths at all. I'm like, 90%? Like, this is insane. Like, almost the whole thing is overblown.
Yeah.
That was the first thing. Then I started to look at like PCR, the like what overnight became this gold standard that everyone's getting their nose swabbed to do this, that, and the next thing. And no one, the average person doesn't know what that is. I understood that is that's not an appropriate diagnostic tool. Mm-hmm. You can't tell if someone is sick based on PCR or infectious or whatever. And there was sort of even like a psyop associated with that because people were saying that those things were being made too sensitive. But what it actually was is that they were testing for like there's viral material all over the place, and they would find stuff that's already there. So if you just start testing, we're going to do a bunch of testing here. Oh, look at all this stuff we found. Then it gives the appearance of a virus that's spreading. So eventually, and I started to wonder, like, okay, let me look at the narrative of how this unfolded. And that's when I was very skeptical of the lab leak narrative from the beginning because it was like from Steve Bannon, and that's who really it originated with. And I think even today, people don't understand what a huge role Steve Bannon has played in shaping the world, this country and the world over the last decade plus. And I'm going to actually have a piece on this very soon. But Steve Bannon, Tom Cotton, all these like hardcore hawks, like neocons and these fake populist hawks were all promoting it early on. This is a pandemic. It's a Chinese bioweapon. And I'm like, come on, this is nonsense. Like, so I was very skeptical of it early on. And I was like, it's a natural origin. I don't know. I didn't pay too much attention to it. But then I started to see like how, like the natural origin narrative was that, it was like not made in a lab. Like it came from some cave and infected people and whatever, right? And then but like when they would say that the lab leak was fake, they would never categorically deny it, say like this is absolutely fake. They could never say it was always, but maybe. And then what happened is the lab leak theory was slowly advanced, and it was even like censored early on. Now, if you're going to censor something, that's going to have an effect of making for like your average social media user or skeptic, it's going to make people think, oh, if it's censored, then it's probably true. Then makes it more attractive. It makes it feel subversive. Like they don't want me to see that, so I'm going to go there. And so say you censor it on Facebook, but it's not censored anywhere else, for example. It's on Instagram and Facebook, it's censored, but not on X. Or at first it's censored on X, but then it's Elon Musk takes over and it's not. And so I realized there is a very, very sophisticated propaganda campaign using multiple sides to push people into accepting the lab leak theory as true. And there's all kinds of different versions of it, like the right wing that's hawkish and, whatever, hates China, CCP, is like, yeah, it came from the Wuhan lab, and Fauci, and like now the kind of the left is like, no, it came from the lab in North Carolina, so it actually came from the US, and like and like you can kind of it's like a Rorschach test. You can like project, your politics or whatever onto this narrative, and all of it is based on this idea that a virus that can be made in some laboratory, and anybody could build a laboratory in anybody's garage. There's no way to control it. Can happen at any time. So therefore, we have to be prepared for the next pandemic, and there's nothing we can do. And then we can, there will lockdowns, and maybe we could have a debate about it. There can be debate, but it legitimizes everything that they did and everything that they want to do for with this kind of thing going forward. And that's basically like, I feel like the lab leak thing is the most successful information or perception management, whatever you want to call it, operation that I've ever seen. And very, very few people just like look at me like I'm crazy if I say there was no pandemic. People, well, at least online. I mean, in person too, but like online. And they also feel like it's irrelevant because they're like, the COVID era is over, it's done. But there's not only were there huge crimes committed, there was an enormous amount of murder committed in that period. But there's also one of, and this is something that I've learned from J.J. Couey, the mRNA vaccines, what are called vaccines or shots or whatever, are often referred to, people call them shots, they call them vaccines, whatever. Those are actually, it's not a new technology. We were told that it's a new technology and, they're trying to perfect it and all this stuff. It's actually an old existing technology that biologists used all the time and J.J. Couey used all the time, called transfection. That, like, I don't know what your background is, but my background, I don't know anything about that, right?
No. Yeah.
But people who know about that, like, that's actually that's why J.J. Couey got fired from his job, because he was saying, we're going to transfect people? Like, that's crazy. That's something we do to mice in the lab. We would never do that on a human being. Are you out of your mind? And the thing is, none of the big kind of thought leaders will call it transfection, because the goal of pharma and more is to legitimize and normalize that technology. That's to say, we can have like personalized medicine, and we're going to be able to figure out the human genome and fix everything and defeat disease. And like, now you see RFK Jr. not only saying, look, I got Coca-Cola to use real sugar, like, but also saying, yeah, we're advancing this mRNA technology. And so everyone who's saying, stop the shots, it's like, it's a controlled opposition narrative, because it's not stop the shots, it's we should never be transfecting people. This is a technology that should never be used on humans altogether. And if we just say stop the shots, not only are we not being clear about what these shots actually are, but we are basically saying that, well, the criticism of the shots from kind of the sort of quote unquote COVID dissident movement is that there's impurities in them, right? There's like, they found all these impurities in them. And so if you can get rid of the impurities, well, then it's still a legitimate platform. So, I think that there's just such a massive amount of not just disinformation, but like it's just like an entire almost simulated universe where we're pretend where we're like told where we think we're getting free information and like a lot of different podcasts from free thinkers and all this stuff, and in reality it's like it's just as controlled, if not more controlled than like
Yes.
the mainstream media, the
Yes.
media that we all like despise now.
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head, and we'll end on that because I know you got dad shit to do. I got dad shit to do too. What I've been struggling with lately is this. I feel like we are purposely being overloaded with information for the explicit purpose of constructing multiple narratives that fit within everybody's subjective realities. So like you were saying earlier with the lab leak thing, it's like people on the right are like, it came from Wuhan, China. People on the left are like, no, it came from North Carolina. However, all these narratives are serving the one master narrative. And like I've been going through this crisis of my own where I'm like, what the fuck is real anymore? Because every time I go on the internet, like I'm a well-read guy, I read stuff and I'm like, nope, that's a lie. That's bullshit. That's a lie. That's bullshit. But then if all this other stuff is bullshit, then what about the stuff that I don't know? And how much have I been fed that, like literally living in London in 1980, in Orwellian London in 1984, like how much of the outside world am I even really aware of?
Right.
And that was actually a lot of the reason why I wanted to talk to you today, because I know you're an honest guy, even by coming out and saying, like, I don't believe there was a pandemic. Like, you're a journalist. That's your career. That's what you fucking do. Like, that's a huge risk to make such a bold statement, right? But that's what I fucking love about you is you don't pull punches. And, I guess in conclusion, man, I think the world needs more of you, dude. Like, I just think, like, I get so, like, myself, just as an observer, as a writer myself, but I'm more on the editorial side. I'm not a journalist. I just get so lost in all this because I'm like, nothing is fucking real. Nothing is real. It's all some version of something designed to make us believe in something for the sake of some agenda. Like, it's just like, fuck, man. Where's the real world?
Yeah. It's really, it's so hard. Also, we're dealing with like multi-generational deceptions that it's like this, stuff that's been planted so long ago. And it's, these narratives that can be like shaped and shifted depending on this and it's really hard to find your way out of the forest, and social media is like it's hard to know who's real and who's what, and it can really drive you mad, and I think that's kind of part of the point of it. And then they want you to like find this certain podcast where it's like two guys talking like you and me, where you're like, hey, I feel like I'm like at the table with them, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So then, and that's another way to get like sucked into a narrative, and then it's really a jungle out there, and like you and I are the same. I'm just like a guy trying to process information and figure out the truth and like protect myself and my family, and and like that's it. So
we all are, man. I think that's where we all find ourselves, especially now, like as we're all parents, and which is fucking crazy. I never thought I'd be a dad. I'm sure you're in the same place. Right.
Right.
And, like we're all just trying to do the best that we can. And I think that, I've been playing with this in my mind lately, like whether or not we were better off 20, 30 years ago, where we all kind of followed this illusion, as although it was an illusion, it was a central axiom that we all kind of referenced against, right? Like history went A, B, C, D, E, F, G. We're the good guys. They're the bad guys. And although now in retrospect, we know that much of it was a lie, at least there was some sort of uniting narrative that brought us all together, some we could commonly believe in. Because now I feel like we're in this state where like everybody has a different perception of reality, and none of them are real because they're all informed by things that are intentionally deceptive and constructed for the sake of leading you toward whatever end they want you at.
Right.
And anyways, that's That's my long-winded way of saying, Dan Cohen, thank you for your time today, my brother. Once that Bannon piece and that COVID piece are out, I would love to have you back to talk about them, man. Listen, everybody watching, Dan is like one of the real, like, there are very, very few real journalists left in the world, and Dan is one of them. And please, Dan, tell everybody where they can find you.
I appreciate it very much, Jason. My site, which I'm going to be publishing more on, and I'll have this piece on Lab Leak and Bannon up, should be within the next few days, is Uncaptured Media. So it's just uncaptured.media. So check me out there, and I have a YouTube channel and Rumble, and I need to expand all of that stuff. But I've been mostly working on this documentary, so I haven't been that active journalistically. So I'm trying to like get this stuff finished and get back to journalism. So yeah, I'll be turning out more work, but always happy to come on, and yeah, thank you so much for having me.
Dude, I'm so glad we could finally make this happen. You know, you're one of my favorite people in the world, man. And it's an honor to talk to you, dude. And just hear it from the lion's mouth, man. Like it's just dope to talk to you and hear it from you. And yeah, once those pieces are out, I'll be knocking on your door again, bugging you, and we'll make this happen.
Awesome. I appreciate that very much.
All right. Thanks, brother.